Penguin Random House Audio presents When These Mountains Burn by David Joy. Read for you by Macleod Andrews. For Ron Rash, my mentor and friend, and for the gone and the going away. I loved the helpless people I loved. Maurice Manning. 1. Rain bled over the dusty windshield. Raymond Mathis wrung the steering wheel in his fists, trying to remember if there was anything left worth taking. The front door of his house stood open, and from the driveway he knew who'd broken in. Fact was, if it wasn't nailed down, it was already gone. What pawned easily went first, and now the boy stole anything that looked like it might hold any value at all. Across the yard, the last of Ray's dogs bawled from the kennel. There'd been a time when he bred the best squirrel and coon dogs ever to come out of Jackson County, a line of black and tan mountain feists that'd tree anything that climbed. He'd raised beagles to run rabbits through bramble, back before outsiders riddled the land with no trespassing signs. And this was the last of them. A lean bitch named Tommy Two-Ton, who was grayed in the face and shook on her hind legs as she balanced against bowed chicken wire. Crossing the yard, Ray was thankful the boy had at least put the dog up this time. The hound was old and blind, but hadn't lost her nose. Earlier that summer, the boy had broken in, left the door standing wide, and Tommy was gone nearly a week before Ray found her 2 coves over, panting and hobbling half-starved down the road, having chased God knows what through the night. A dog gets on a scent and there's no turning back, and in that way dogs and men aren't that different. Ray didn't blame Tommy like he didn't blame the boy. Both were after something they had no business chasing, but he understood how a single thought could enter a man's mind and absolutely consume him. "You ready for supper?" Ray said as he slid the barrel bolt back on the door. The bones of the 5-stall kennel had weathered gray, but were still as solid as the day he framed them. Rain slid off the back of the tin roof and seeped into the ground as quickly as it fell. The hound howled melancholic and lonesome as if she hadn't seen a soul in years. When the door swung open, she trotted through the yard and into the house, then shook herself dry with ears slapping jowls. This was the first rain to touch the mountain in months. The ground was so dry that stopping there in the yard, Raymond could almost hear the earth lapping at what fell, trying to wet its mouth enough to stave off dying of thirst. The ridges were burning, and the air smelled of smoke, and there was no front in the forecast. Ray figured this little spell was just a cruel joke. Still, he stood there staring up into the sky, letting the drops beat against his eyelids while he prayed the shower long. A stingy brimmed hat sat low on his brow. He wore a pair of key overalls, stained dark at the knees, and a duck barn coat with a crude patch stitched over the right shoulder. 6'5" and pushing 300, he was a giant of a man with forearms thick as fence posts. He had hands like his father's that swallowed most anything they held. He remembered one time at a livestock auction as a kid how an old man joked that with mitts like that his father could shake hands with God. All his life Ray had figured that was about right. The board and batten farmhouse looked almost silver in the rain, its cedar shake roof sullied green with moss. The front door tapped against the inside wall on a light breeze. The lights were on in the front room. The boy hadn't even needed his key because Ray hadn't locked the door. There were no other threats this far out in the country. He could have changed the locks and his habits, but then the boy might have busted out the windows or kicked down the door, and that'd just be something else to fix. Maybe that was why Ray didn't bother, or maybe it was some hope buried in the pit of his heart that said, one day he won't come back to steal. One day he'll just come home. Sometimes he blamed himself for the boy's faults. When his wife, Doris, got sick with cancer, Ray didn't bat an eye when the pain meds walked off. He was too busy watching his wife shrivel down to nothing. Sometimes he wondered if his absence was to blame. But the truth was, before the pills it was crystal, and before the crystal it was pills, and before that it was booze and weed and anything else he could get his hands on. A few weeks back, the law had found the boy leaned against the brick wall in front of Rose's with a needle in his arm, white-faced and open-mouthed like he might have been stone-cold dead. And none of that was anybody's fault but the boy's. Ray still thought of him like that, as a boy, and in a lot of ways he was, a child trapped in a grown man's body. Ricky was 41 years old, closing in on a casket. There were times when Ray wondered if some folks were just born sorry, and that thought hurt the worst because that was no way to think about his own flesh and blood, no way to think of his son. Tommy Two-Ton stood by her food bowl at the edge of the kitchen, and Ray knelt and scratched behind the hound's ears. The dog leaned all of her weight into the palm of Ray's hand. A milky haze clouded Tommy's eyes, and she sniffed the air when Ray crossed the kitchen for an open sack of feed in the pantry. The silverware drawer was pulled open on the cabinets. The drawer was emptied to its peeling flower-patterned liner. Ray closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose, a mismatched set of stainless dinnerware, stolen from the drawer. Had a lot more forks than spoons, a lot more spoons than flat knives. Ain't that right? Ray grumbled to the dog as he held the 50-pound bag over the bowl and poured kibble from the torn corner. Tommy took a bite and peered up with those milky eyes while she chewed, not having the foggiest what the old man was saying, but satisfied just the same. In the bedroom, Ray unfastened his galluses and dropped his overalls by the foot of the bed. He wore overalls every day of his life and a dress pair on Sundays, same as his father and grandfather, both now buried in theirs. A chestnut jewelry box he'd bought his wife at Mountain Heritage Day centered the dresser right where she'd left it. He glanced at himself in the vanity. A thick salt and pepper beard, starting just under his eyes, hung to the center of his chest. Heavy facial hair covered his lips, his words always seeming to come out of nowhere, his mood always concealed. He lifted his hat by the pinched front crown, ran his fingers through what was left of his hair, and let out a heavy breath. A small brass clasp that held the jewelry box closed was unlatched. Standing there, he traced the edge of the lid with the tip of his finger for a long time before he found the courage to flip the box open. The small silver locket and wedding band that had belonged to Doris's mother rested on one side of the black velvet bottom. The silver wedding band was warped into a crooked oval, almost completely worn in two where it rode between her mother's fingers while she worked the cabbage fields. The gold band and quarter-carat engagement ring he'd bought from Hollifield's to ask for Doris's hand were strung together with a thin green thread, her having never been much for wearing jewelry. The only other content was a tarnished wheat penny a little girl had given her once out of the blue at the meat counter in Harold's supermarket. One of those random things that find their way into your hand, and you wind up saving the rest of your life for no particular reason at all. Ray closed the box and snapped the clasp shut. He braced his knuckles on top of the dresser and leaned in close to the mirror. The whites of his eyes were bloodshot and yellowed, their pale blue color almost gray. He was thankful some things were still sacred, if not forever, at least right then. Closing his eyes, he inhaled until his chest could hold no more, and tried to imagine where the boy might be. The sound of the rain died on the roof, and that silence washed his mind empty. Barely enough had fallen to rinse the dust off the world. He could not recall the last time a prayer was answered. 2. A spot fire on Moses Creek rim-lit the mountains, but the wind was wrong to pose any real danger of it jumping the ridge to Weyahutta, a place locals pronounced Worry Hut. Raymond sat on his porch the way he did every evening, listening to the police scanner while he smoked a backwoods and rattled Redbreast over ice in the bottom of a jelly jar. A man needed something constant, something unchanging, that he could lean against when the world went to pot. Sooner or later the cards always fell that way, and the difference between those who buried their heads in their hands and those who kept their chins above water became a matter of reprieve. With the good and the bad, Ray started his days with a pot of coffee and a book, and ended them with 4 fingers of good whiskey and a gas station cigar. From the sound of the radio chatter, the woods had...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?